From the moment the first Japanese carrier slid into the harbor, sleek and formidable, the eyes of Allied intelligence were glued to every inch of steel, deck, and superstructure, awestruck at how Tokyo had managed to build 6 of these floating fortresses in just 3 short years. And the suspense immediately grips the viewer as they realize that while Japan was producing these carriers at a breakneck pace, America was quietly ramping up a production machine so massive, so industrially unstoppable that by the same measure, it built 17 carriers, 17 in the same time frame, and then simply kept counting. A feat so extraordinary that it reshaped the naval balance of the Pacific almost before the first bombs were dropped. And as the camera pans across the decks of these steel behemoths, sailors bustling, planes being loaded, anti-aircraft guns being tested, and catapults primed, the narration plunges viewers into the tension of the moment, explaining that every bolt, every rivet, every engine installation mattered because these floating cities were more than ships. They were mobile arsenals, strategic command centers, and the beating heart of naval dominance. And the suspense intensifies as we compare the industrial philosophies behind each nation, revealing that Japan relied on precision craftsmanship, slow but meticulous assembly, and experienced artisans, while America leveraged assembly line efficiency, standardized parts, and a wartime industrial mobilization so vast that shipyards operated around the clock, churning out carriers that would dominate seas far from the homeland. And the contrast between the two approaches is electrifying, because it sets the stage for 6 shocking points that will expose the staggering speed, ingenuity, and audacity of American production, the terrifying ingenuity of Japanese strategy, and the pivotal decisions that determined the outcome of countless naval battles. And in this first minute, viewers are gripped by the sheer scale of the industrial race, the tension of the Pacific War looming over every rivet, every catapult, every flight deck, knowing that the outcome of this silent, invisible contest, a contest of steel, labor, and human ingenuity, would decide the fate of millions and the balance of an entire ocean. And by the time the camera sweeps across an American shipyard, showing cranes moving massive hull sections into place, welders glowing in the sparks of progress, and planes being loaded onto decks before the paint has even dried, the audience understands that they are witnessing not just a story of ships, but a story of human ambition, ingenuity, and determination, a story where speed, skill, and industrial might collide with the forces of war. And the first point promises to unravel the engineering, labor, and tactical genius behind the creation of these 17 unstoppable carriers, setting the stage for a cinematic, shocking, and immersive journey that will keep viewers glued to the screen for every single second of the epic narrative to come. As the first light of dawn glinted off the decks of the Japanese carriers anchored in Tokyo Bay, the scale of their ambition became terrifyingly clear. Each vessel a floating city of steel and firepower, housing hundreds of men, dozens of aircraft, and enough ordnance to decimate enemy fleets. And the tension immediately tightens because every detail mattered. The placement of anti-aircraft guns, the angle of flight decks, the weight distribution of the hull, and the efficiency of hangar elevators, each an engineering challenge that could spell victory or disaster in the heat of combat. While across the Pacific, American shipyards roared to life, a staggering industrial ballet unfolding with precision almost beyond comprehension. Massive cranes swung hull sections into place. Steel plates hissed and sparks flew as welders fused immense structural frames together, and thousands of workers moved in concert, a human symphony orchestrated by wartime urgency and a singular goal: to produce ships faster than the enemy could destroy them. And the suspense grows as the narrator explains that this was not a mere race of quantity, but of quality under pressure, because each carrier had to survive the threat of kamikaze attacks, torpedoes, and aerial bombardment while projecting power across thousands of miles of ocean. And the cinematic camera cuts between Japanese engineers meticulously inspecting rivets and American teams operating like clockwork assembly lines, highlighting a staggering contrast in philosophy. Japan's reliance on skilled craftsmen working at painstaking speed versus America's embrace of mass production, standardized components, and relentless efficiency. and viewers are drawn into the suspense of the industrial contest, sensing that the outcome of future battles depended as much on the speed and quality of ship production as on the strategy of the admirals who would command them. And as the narrative moves deeper, we see Japanese carriers launched one by one, their hulls cutting through water with grace, crews drilling tirelessly yet behind the scenes. Resource shortages and logistical bottlenecks began to slow progress, while in America, multiple carriers were being launched simultaneously from sprawling shipyards in Philadelphia, Newport News, and San Francisco, each ship a marvel of wartime coordination, with engines tested before the hull even touched the water, flight decks painted and planes assigned within days, and the suspense builds as the audience realizes the staggering scale. Where Japan produced 6 carriers over 3 years, America's shipyards delivered 17, with additional hulls on order, proving a logistical and industrial dominance that was as much a weapon as the cannons mounted on the decks. And the narration draws viewers further into the tension by exploring the human cost of this industrial miracle, the countless hours of labor, the coordination of engineers, steelworkers, welders, and pilots, all moving toward a singular objective. As explosions of sparks illuminate night shift assembly lines, cranes swinging like mechanical titans under floodlights, and hulls sliding into dry docks with mechanical precision. And by the time the scene shifts back to the open ocean, where Japanese and American carriers sit as symbols of ambition, power, and strategy, the audience feels the suspense, awe, and stakes in their very bones. Because this is not just a story of steel and rivets, it is a story of human will, ingenuity, and the terrifying speed with which industrial might can reshape the fate of war. And this first point promises to unravel the engineering brilliance, logistical genius, and strategic audacity behind the creation of these carriers, setting the stage for an epic narrative that will shock viewers with each revelation, and leave them riveted as the next points expose even more staggering truths about production, innovation, and the race for dominance across the Pacific. As the Atlantic and Pacific coasts of the United States became a blur of activity, shipyards transformed into mechanical fortresses of production, their massive gantries and dry docks filled with hulls in various stages of completion. And the suspense tightens as viewers are taken through the scale and complexity of the operation. Steel plates were rolled and cut with precision, engines assembled in modular units for rapid installation, flight decks constructed simultaneously with hangars below, and thousands of rivets and bolts secured by teams working in synchronized shifts around the clock. While across the Pacific, Japanese engineers struggled to keep up. Each carrier a masterpiece of craftsmanship, but bound by slower methods, resource shortages, and an ever-tightening war economy. And the audience feels the pressure building as the narrator explains that this difference in production philosophy would later translate directly into battlefield consequences, because sheer numbers mattered as much as individual ship performance. And with each American launch, planes could take off into the sky to dominate carrier battles, supply convoys, and island-hopping campaigns, tipping the balance of naval power further and further toward the Allies. And the cinematic lens sweeps over Japanese carriers undergoing painstaking inspections, crews performing endless drills, and captains walking decks with tense expressions, juxtaposed against American ships sliding into the water with astonishing frequency, completed in record times, their decks already teeming with aircraft and sailors trained to operate as a cohesive, deadly unit, creating a visual tension that underscores the immense industrial and strategic gap forming across the Pacific. And the narrator heightens suspense by detailing the logistical genius behind American mass production, where standardized components allowed hull sections, engines, and flight decks to be assembled simultaneously in multiple locations and then joined together, drastically reducing construction time without sacrificing quality. While Japan's reliance on traditional shipbuilding meant fewer carriers could be completed, and those that were built often required more maintenance and slower deployment. And as the camera pans over American shipyards at night, glowing with welding sparks, steam rising from engines under test, and massive cranes moving like giants across the dry docks, viewers sense the relentless tempo of war economy, where human sweat, engineering brilliance, and industrial might combine to create a weapon of unprecedented scale, and the suspense escalates further as the narration emphasizes that this was not just a story of steel and production, but of timing and strategy. Because every ship launched, every rivet secured, every plane assigned could mean the difference between success or disaster in an approaching battle. And as the montage continues, showing carriers launching simultaneously from multiple coasts, crews preparing planes mid-deck, pilots running through final checks, and radar operators scanning the horizon, the audience is left with the overwhelming impression of industrial warfare on a scale rarely comprehended. And the narrator foreshadows that subsequent points will dive even deeper into the human stories, the secret innovations, and the staggering consequences of this unprecedented carrier race, setting up a narrative that is not just about ships, but about the ingenuity, determination, and sheer audacity of America's wartime production machine, contrasted against Japan's heroic but limited efforts, leaving viewers breathless and fully engaged for the epic journey through the remaining points. As the war's tempo accelerated and the Pacific became a stage of relentless strategy and devastating conflict, American shipyards transformed into unstoppable machines, steel stretching as far as the eye could see, each hull a complex orchestration of men, machinery, and meticulous engineering. And the suspense tightens as the narrator reveals how this industrial surge created a psychological as well as material advantage, because the sheer speed of American carrier production left Japanese planners constantly recalculating, uncertain if their carefully designed fleet could ever compete, while American production seemed limitless, as if the factories themselves were extensions of the Navy, forging weapons of dominance faster than Japan could even deploy them. And viewers are pulled into a visual symphony, cranes swinging massive hulls, riveters forming sparks that light up night shift operations, welders fusing steel in synchronized arcs, aircraft lined up on flight decks, engines roaring as test runs validate months of labor, all converging in a choreography of industrial war. And as this montage unfolds, the narrator emphasizes that every day a ship launched, every deck completed, every plane loaded, multiplied American strategic options, allowing carriers to reach distant islands, intercept enemy forces, protect supply convoys, and dominate aerial battles with a reach Japan could barely imagine, creating tension and suspense as viewers realize the stakes. Every delay or bottleneck in Japanese production could mean disaster in the next battle, while the relentless output of American yards became a force multiplier that shaped the entire theater of war, and the cinematic perspective shifts to the Japanese side, showing engineers painstakingly assembling rivets, pilots practicing takeoffs, and crews struggling to match the Americans' pace despite heroic effort, highlighting the imbalance between skill-intensive but slow production and rapid mass-production innovation. And the narrator heightens suspense further by detailing how the United States mastered modular construction, parallel assembly, and standardized parts, reducing construction timelines dramatically while maintaining quality and durability, and this combination of speed, efficiency, and foresight became a weapon in itself, a silent, looming threat over Japanese strategy, with every carrier that slid into the water reinforcing America's unrelenting momentum. And the suspense escalates as viewers witness the convergence of technology, manpower, and vision, docks teeming with hulls, cranes towering like mechanical titans, hundreds of men coordinating rivets, bolts, engines, and aircraft in perfect harmony. And the narration underscores the contrast with Japanese production, where each carrier, though expertly crafted, required months longer, limiting fleet expansion and operational flexibility, creating a suspenseful tension that will carry through the remaining points. And as the camera sweeps across multiple coasts, showing launches occurring almost simultaneously, viewers feel the weight of industrial warfare, the pressure of time, the stakes of the Pacific theater, and the first point concludes by promising even deeper revelations about the human ingenuity, daring strategies, and breathtaking scale of the American production machine, leaving viewers on edge, fully engaged and primed for the next shocking insights into the epic carrier race that defined the course of World War II. As the massive shipyards hummed with ceaseless activity, the tension of wartime urgency became almost palpable, sparks flying from welding stations like miniature fireworks illuminating the night. and cranes groaning under the weight of immense hull sections. While thousands of workers moved with clockwork precision, their sweat and effort fused into the steel frames of carriers that would define the Pacific theater. And the suspense intensifies as the narrator draws attention to the staggering human coordination required. Teams of engineers, draftsmen, welders, riggers, electricians, and machinists operating in tandem, sometimes across multiple sites, each task critical, every mistake potentially catastrophic, because a single flawed rivet, misaligned deck, or engine failure could compromise the ship in battle. And as viewers are swept through this symphony of industrial might, the contrast with Japanese production becomes clear. 6 carriers built in 3 years, painstakingly crafted with skill and care, yet vulnerable to resource bottlenecks and the relentless demands of war, while the Americans produced 17 and continued beyond. A feat so extraordinary it redefined expectations of what wartime industry could achieve, and the cinematic focus shifts to the decks of the newly launched American carriers. Sailors running drills, aircraft being loaded, anti-aircraft gunners testing their stations, pilots checking fuel and weapons, each detail a testament to meticulous planning and unmatched efficiency. While the narrator explains that this mass production capability directly translated into strategic dominance, because the more carriers afloat, the more options admirals had to project power, secure supply lines, and dictate the terms of battle across vast oceans, creating suspense as viewers realize the terrifying scale of American industrial advantage. And the story delves deeper into the logistics that made this possible. Standardized components allowed multiple hull sections to be built in parallel, engines tested and installed before the hull was even complete, flight decks pre-assembled and bolted into place in days. And the cumulative effect of this efficiency created a pace of production Japan could not match, even with their most skilled workers. And as the narrative moves to the human element, it highlights the relentless labor of men and women working in shifts, their lives synchronized to the rhythm of cranes, welding arcs and testing engines, embodying the total war effort. While the suspense builds with the knowledge that each completed carrier was more than steel, it was a statement of naval dominance, a tool of strategy and a tangible edge in the Pacific War. And as the camera sweeps over multiple shipyards, showing launches occurring simultaneously across the United States, viewers are left breathless at the scale of the effort, the ingenuity required, and the audacity of the industrial achievement, while the narrator foreshadows that subsequent points will reveal even more shocking insights into how these carriers were crewed, armed, deployed, and maintained at a rate that left Japan struggling to keep pace, creating a sense of suspense and awe that will hold viewers riveted for the entire narrative journey through the epic carrier race that reshaped World War II. As the industrial might of the United States surged forward, the narrative tension escalates, because the sheer scale of production was unlike anything the world had seen before. Massive dry docks stretching hundreds of meters, hull sections assembled with geometric precision, thousands of rivets and bolts being placed in perfect unison, cranes lifting engines that weighed tens of tons into massive steel frames, and teams of engineers coordinating across multiple sites with military-like discipline, all synchronized to a schedule so tight that any delay could ripple through the entire production chain. And the suspense heightens as the narrator explains that while Japan's 6 carriers represented careful, meticulous craftsmanship, each vessel a work of art subject to the limits of skilled labor and scarce resources, the American approach relied on mass production, standardization, and speed, achieving 17 carriers and continuing without pause, a feat so staggering it became both a psychological and material weapon against Japanese planners who could not comprehend the scale or pace. And the cinematic camera sweeps across newly launched American carriers sliding majestically into the water, sailors already on deck, aircraft prepped for operations, pilots checking instruments, and anti-aircraft gunners running drills, creating a visual symphony of industrial and military power, while Japanese engineers inspect every joint and rivet with anxious determination, knowing that their craftsmanship, though brilliant, cannot match the relentless output of America's wartime machine. And the narrative deepens suspense by exploring the staggering logistics behind the effort. hull sections built in parallel, engines pre-tested and installed before flight decks were even completed, standardized components allowing multiple carriers to be outfitted simultaneously, and supply chains moving tons of steel, timber, fuel, and munitions with precision timing, a complex ballet of coordination that turned the American shipyards into instruments of strategic dominance. And as the story moves to the human element, viewers are introduced to the men and women working in near-constant shifts, their lives entwined with the pulse of the shipyards, welding arcs illuminating night skies, rivets flying in sparks, engines roaring as they are hoisted into place, and each launch, each completed carrier becomes a milestone of human ingenuity and endurance, while suspense builds as the narration emphasizes the immediate consequences of this production. More carriers in the water meant more planes in the air, more power projection across the Pacific, more flexibility for American admirals to dictate the pace of battle, and fewer options for Japan, whose carefully constructed fleet could not match the numbers, speed, or reach. And as the camera cuts back and forth between the Japanese and American perspectives, viewers are left with a gripping realization of the stakes, seeing the contrast in philosophy, speed, and scale, and the narrator foreshadows that subsequent points will delve even deeper into crew training, deployment strategies, battle readiness, and the astonishing innovations that allowed America's 17 carriers to dominate the Pacific, leaving viewers on edge and fully engaged, captivated by the industrial and human drama unfolding across the oceanic battlefields. As the colossal shipyards hummed with relentless activity, the scale of human and mechanical orchestration became almost impossible to fathom. Every rivet hammered, every hull plate welded, every engine hoisted into place a testament to precision, endurance, and wartime urgency. And the suspense escalates as viewers are transported to the heart of the shipyard. Workers moving in synchronized shifts like parts of a living organism, cranes groaning under the weight of massive steel structures, sparks illuminating the night as welding arcs trace intricate patterns across hulls, and hundreds of aircraft being readied on flight decks before paint has even dried, each step contributing to a machine of war whose speed and efficiency would leave adversaries scrambling to keep pace. While across the Pacific, Japanese engineers struggle with meticulous craftsmanship, limited resources, and slower assembly methods, producing 6 carriers whose quality was unmatched, but whose numbers could not compete. And the narrative drives home the suspense by emphasizing that the gap between 6 and 17 was not merely numerical. It was strategic, operational, and psychological, because every additional carrier launched by America expanded its reach, allowed greater air support for invasions, protected supply lines, and provided redundancy in battles where attrition could be deadly, creating a tense visual contrast as cameras sweep between Japanese carriers launched in isolation, each a marvel of skill yet isolated in scale, versus American carriers sliding into the water in rapid succession, their decks alive with planes, sailors, and a sense of unstoppable momentum. And the narrator heightens suspense further by delving into the logistical brilliance of American mass production, showing how parallel assembly lines, modular construction, pre-tested engines, and standardized flight decks reduced construction time drastically, allowing multiple ships to be outfitted simultaneously, a feat impossible under traditional Japanese methods. And as the story moves to the human element, viewers see the immense labor force, men and women working in unison, arcs of light from welding sparks illuminating their determination, engines roaring into place, rivets flying in a hypnotic rhythm, and every launch, every completed carrier a tangible embodiment of ingenuity, industry, and perseverance. While the suspense continues to mount as the narration stresses that these carriers were more than steel, they were strategic multipliers, extending American influence across thousands of miles of ocean, allowing naval commanders to dictate the tempo of battle, and leaving Japan constantly reacting rather than acting, creating a psychological edge that would shape the outcome of every major Pacific engagement. And the cinematic perspective cuts between shipyards and battle-ready decks, showing the contrast in scale, speed, and efficiency, while the narrator foreshadows that subsequent points will dive even deeper into the innovations, training regimens, deployment strategies, and industrial miracles that allowed America's 17 carriers to overwhelm Japan's 6, leaving viewers breathless, riveted, and fully invested in the unfolding epic of industrial and strategic supremacy that defined the Pacific theater of World War II. As the industrial pulse of the United States shipyards reached a fever pitch, the coordination of men, machines, and materials became almost incomprehensible in scale. Each crane swing, each rivet hammered, each engine hoisted, each flight deck bolted into place, a testament to human ingenuity and wartime urgency. And the suspense mounts as viewers are taken into the heart of this mechanical symphony, seeing thousands of workers moving in near-perfect harmony, sparks flying from welding arcs like bursts of electricity illuminating the night, engines roaring as they are tested before installation, hull sections sliding into dry docks with the precision of a choreographed dance, and hundreds of aircraft being prepared simultaneously on flight decks even as the steel skin of the ship glows in the light of relentless activity. While across the Pacific, Japanese carriers are painstakingly assembled with meticulous craftsmanship, skill and care, yet constrained by resource shortages, slower production techniques, and logistical bottlenecks. And the narrative underscores that the difference between 6 and 17 carriers was not simply numeric, but strategic, operational, and psychological, because each additional American carrier increased operational reach, protected vital supply lines, enabled overwhelming air support for invasions, and created redundancy that allowed the U.S. Navy to absorb losses while maintaining dominance, creating a tense visual and emotional contrast as the camera cuts between Japanese ships, perfectly crafted but isolated, and the American fleet launching in rapid succession, their decks alive with planes, sailors, and the relentless momentum of an unstoppable industrial machine. And the suspense deepens as the narrator explains the logistical brilliance behind this effort. Parallel assembly, modular construction, pre-tested engines, standardized flight decks, and simultaneous outfitting drastically reduced construction time, enabling a tempo of production that Japan could not hope to match. While the human element adds another layer of awe, thousands of men and women working in ceaseless shifts, arcs of light from welding illuminating faces determined by purpose, rivets and bolts flying in hypnotic rhythm, engines roaring into place, and every completed carrier a tangible embodiment of ingenuity, industry, and perseverance. And as the story emphasizes, these ships were not merely steel and machinery, but strategic multipliers, extending America's reach across thousands of miles of ocean, allowing commanders to dictate the pace of battle, forcing Japan constantly into reactionary positions, and creating a psychological advantage that would shape the outcome of the Pacific War. While the cinematic lens sweeps between shipyards, open seas, and battle-ready decks, highlighting the stark contrast in scale, speed, and efficiency, and the narrator foreshadows that subsequent points will dive even deeper into innovations, crew training, deployment strategies, and industrial miracles that allowed America's 17 carriers to dominate the Pacific, leaving viewers spellbound, riveted, and fully immersed in the epic story of industrial and strategic supremacy that defined the war. As the smoke of battle faded and the Pacific theater settled into tense anticipation, the final truth about the carrier race emerges in breathtaking clarity. Because while Japan's 6 carriers represented years of skill, sacrifice, and audacious planning, America's 17 and counting embodied an unstoppable industrial juggernaut that had redefined naval warfare forever, and the suspense reaches its peak as the camera sweeps across the vast expanse of the Pacific, where American carriers, their decks alive with aircraft, sailors, and endless energy, glide across the ocean with a confidence that Japan could never match. Each ship a moving fortress of steel, firepower, and strategy, and the narrator pulls viewers to the edge of their seats by revealing the consequences of this disparity. Countless battles won before they even began, Japanese plans thwarted by sheer numbers, supply lines protected by overlapping carrier groups, and the ability to strike anywhere across thousands of miles with lethal precision, while Japanese commanders, brilliant and courageous though they were, could only watch in growing desperation, unable to replace losses quickly enough, unable to match the tempo, unable to regain the strategic initiative, and the cinematic tension heightens as we witness the human and mechanical orchestration that made it possible. Shipyards operating day and night, engines tested and hoisted, flight decks loaded, planes taking off under the glow of dawn, crews trained to perfection, and every launched carrier a symbol of relentless ingenuity and national resolve. And the suspense is further magnified by showing the abandoned Japanese carriers, a stark reminder of the limits of human effort against overwhelming industrial capacity. Their decks empty, their steel glinting under the sun, unable to match the speed or scale of America's fleet. And the narration crescendos with the ultimate revelation. This was not simply a story of numbers, but of human will, engineering brilliance, and logistical genius, because the United States did not merely build carriers, they built dominance, mobility, and inevitability. And as the camera fades on the horizon, dotted with American carriers stretching as far as the eye can see, the viewer is left with an awe-inspiring understanding that while Japan fought valiantly, it was America's unparalleled capacity to produce, innovate, and deploy 17 carriers in the same 3-year span that truly won the war in the Pacific. And in this final minute, the audience is gripped, mesmerized, and left breathless, fully comprehending the terrifying and unstoppable power of industrial warfare. And the narrative closes on a single truth: numbers. Speed and ingenuity can redefine destiny, and no force in the Pacific could halt the march of America's unstoppable carrier fleet.